What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the altar again. And this time, after a very, very long time, we return with Jeff Irwin of Willhaven. It is great to be able to have you back. Thanks for coming on the show today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it's been quite a while. I still haven't forgotten that St. Vitus show, though, that you guys played a long time ago. That was a real hell of a time. That was my first time seeing Willhaven, and definitely worth the wait, I gotta say.
Yeah, that was a fun show. We hadn't played in New York in like 20 years, so to go back and play and actually have people there was pretty killer. It was a fun show.
Yeah, it was a historic moment, and I was glad to be a part of it. But this new album, 7, is absolutely kick-ass, and I got to tell you, like, it really reminded me of what made me gravitate towards Willhaven to begin with. Being that this was quite a bit of time since your last album, Muerte, was 7 meant to be like a new beginning in a way, or was it meant to sort of follow up Muerte in a way and kind of be a continuation?
No, I think every record we go into, we try to do something a little different than the past record. So this one, I knew Morte was, we kind of went back to our roots a little bit on Morte. And then this one, we're like, okay, let's make something heavier than Morte and a little more riff oriented. So basically we just use our previous records like a stepping stone, is like trying to see what we can do next with the next record. So it wasn't really supposed to be Morte Part 2, just like, all right, let's just clean the slate and start over. Let's keep the Willhaven vibe, but let's just try to write something different than our last record.
Yeah. Well, you led me perfectly into the next question, actually, because has every like Willhaven album began with sort of like a preconceived vision in a way? Because when you like compare an album like Carpe Diem to like the debut of El Diablo, and then you look at 7 or Morte, every album does tend to sort of like play by its own rules. So, is there ever a vision that you go into the making of an album with, or is it a very like throw paint at the wall and see what sticks?
Yeah, it's basically just wipe the slate clean, start all over. Even our EP that we did before El Diablo sounds nothing like El Diablo, So I think we just go into the record saying, okay, let's do something different. If you put on 7, you can hear pretty much all the records all in one record on 7. It's like you hear Carpe Diem, El Diablo. So there's always that Willhaven sound, but as far as like following a template, we try not to. We try to do something different with each record.
Yeah. And when you go from Luna to Five of Fire to, For All the Future Time, it seems like, again, like there's a very experimental journey behind it in a way. Instrumentally, is this like a reflection of what you and everybody in the band were feeling at that particular time? Or is this like, or was this more of like an escapism in a way?
Yeah, I think we started writing in 2019, and I had actually the riff for Luna I had for like 10 years. So that was the first riff. Like I was like, okay, let's build off this riff and make this kind of like the base of the record. And that was the whole initial thing, just make a really heavy riff oriented record, but still kind of soundscapey and, kind of incorporate our own vision into like kind of more riff heavy record. And then COVID hit, and then we were just like, okay, let's just take our time and work on and rewrite some of the songs we had already kind of written in 2019. And so it was kind of a long process, but yeah, I think everybody was just kind of, when 2020 hit, we didn't know what was going to happen with the world. So we were just like, okay, well, we can still write music and work on music to get away from everything going on in the world. But I would say I'm probably like 5 or 6 of the songs that we initially created in 2019 were all just ripped apart and reworked during the COVID era. So yeah, it was kind of I guess it was every emotion like was incorporated in making this record.
Well, and you just answered it in a way, because I was going to ask if you were bringing stuff, like you mentioned you had the riff from Luna for almost a decade, like is what we're hearing, like were these the initial ideas of how these songs should be arranged, or once COVID hit, everything just sort of like changed a lot?
Yeah, I had quite a few songs written, and then when COVID hit, we were like, okay, we're not going to put this out anytime soon, obviously. So I just went back and listened to the record with a fine comb and said, you know what, I don't like this song as much as I thought I did. I'm going to just tear it apart. Let's rework it, restart it. So COVID was a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because it gave us 2.5 years to just sit there and work on the record and not have to like worry about getting something out or rushing to get something out. We're like, okay, well, we're not playing a show anytime soon. There's no need for this record to come out. We don't have huge fan bases clamoring for it. Like, you know, the Deftones had the same issue of trying to get it out during COVID. They put it out, but we're like, we don't need to do that. So let's just go ahead and just tear these songs apart, rework them until we're completely happy with them. And so it was kind of a blessing in disguise that we had that much time just to kind of rework things, at least for me.
It seemed like that there was no stars to guide you. Pun may or may not be intended in a way, right?
Yeah, totally. We were just kind of just playing it by ear and just taking our time with it. You know, there was no rush, so we're just we'll just put it out when we're ready.
I've always thought that like Willhaven has sort of like been like the, I mean, I don't like to categorize, but like kind of like having the sort of like post-hardcore effect to you guys with like this sort of like mathiness behind it. I always thought that you were like the more thought-provoking band behind it, because when you have, you know, the sort of like song titles that you do and the sort of philosophical nature of your band, it almost seems like you're the band where, like, if you're like playing with a show like a Glassjaw or a Poison the Well or a Car Bomb, everybody's killing each other, but then your set comes on and then everybody is thinking and reflects into themselves in a way.
Yeah.
But has Willhaven really approached things from sort of like a philosophical standpoint, where maybe you like heard a philosophy or a lyrical idea and that helped guide your hand with regards to the making of the music?
No, you know what? I don't know. It's weird. Everything I write just comes like I'm a conduit for something. You know, I don't know what it is, but I've never taken a lesson playing guitar. I'm self-taught. So everything I play just somehow finds me and comes through me. You know, as cheesy as that sounds, but it's the truth. It's like there is no concept, there is no meaning behind it. I just play what just comes out of my hands. And the only vision I try to take that is like, you know, I don't want to sound like another band, and I don't want to rip anybody off, you know, blatantly. You know, I guess sometimes we write a riff like, oh my God, that sounds like so-and-so, but you know, I've always wanted to do our own thing, but keep it different, you know, because we grew up in a hardcore scene where a lot of things were similar. You know, the fast beats and the riffs and stuff. And so when we wrote El Diablo, like, okay, we're in that scene, but we don't want to play straight riffs and we don't want to play hardcore beats. Like, we wanted to do something very Neurosis-y. We want to do something kind of out of the box, you know, and separate us from the rest of the bands that were in our scene. So that was kind of the template of like the beginning. Like, hey, we don't want to have sing-alongs. We don't want to have like these anthems. We just want to go out there and just make people think and do something different. And I think ever since El Diablo, it's kind of been our forefront. It's like, okay, let's try to do something different. Let's keep, you know, pushing our own lane, you know, and it's hurt us because, you know, we're still an underground cult band because a lot of people don't understand our music that they would if we were writing something more easier. But at the same time, we're happy where we're at, and we're happy what we stand on and what we stand for. And we love what we put out in our music. So yeah, it's just something that just happens, I think, really.
Well, how did like the sort of like I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but how did the hardcore scene in your area of like Sacramento really react? First of all, I went to Sacramento for the first time last year for Aftershock, and even though it's the capital of California, I was pretty astonished for like how small and like how, you know, rural the whole area is. So like coming from the same land as Deftones, it seems like you and Deftones were the two stand out in like an overall hardcore scene, right?
Yeah, there wasn't much of a hardcore scene here when we started. You know, we had a local club called Cattle Club where all like the local bands played, and there was a mixture of everything. You had Deftones, you had hip hop. We played there. We had a band called Afar, and you know, Papa Roach played there for a little bit. So it was just kind of all over the place, that club. But there wasn't really a specific hardcore scene that like New York had. You know, New York was kind of the mecca for that, and then LA had a little bit of a scene too, and that's where we would go down and play, is in LA. We'd play with Strife. Every time Earth Crisis came through, or Snapcase, or, you know, we played with Integrity, stuff like that. So those were all the shows we played in SoCal. So SAC didn't really have one. So we were kind of more ingrained in the SoCal scene, playing Showcase Theater and, you know, sometimes the Whiskey if they had hardcore shows and stuff. So, you know, that's where we were like, okay, we need to kind of do our own thing, you know, and kind of brought that to Sacramento. So it was two different scenes, you know. We had our cool little family vibe scene here with all these bands, and then LA was more like the hardcore. Everybody had their their lane, you know, down there.
Well, I remember being like California, the home to San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, like all of these huge, huge cities, and then the capital is Sacramento. Like my hotel was in the my hotel was in the middle of farmland. Like
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
Aftershock was awesome, but like I was like, really, this is California?
yeah, we are Sacramento is the Midwest of California,
Yeah,
for sure.
I could just picture like a young kid like super excited to go to California, and then like he lands in Mexico or lands in Sacramento, and like it's just like, wait a minute, this isn't what I've seen in the pictures. This isn't Disney World. This isn't Los Angeles. This isn't like, where am I? And it's like discovering Santa Claus isn't real.
Yeah, and it's definitely a unique city. It's in the middle of nowhere, you know. But we are close to San Francisco and Lake Tahoe. We're right in the middle of everything, so it's kind of nice in a sense. We're not living in a big city, but we're still close to the big city, so we can pop in and pop out.
Yeah.
So and the weather's always really good here. But I think that's what led to such a great music scene in Sacramento. Is like we didn't have a lot going on. You know, there wasn't a huge nightlife here. We didn't have the ocean where we were able to go surfing. Like we had skateboarding, and music was pretty much our lives, you know. And that's how these bands became so good at their craft. Is like that's kind of all we had to do at the time. We just play music and skate, and so it just.
Yeah, like I mean, Los Angeles is all cool and stuff, like their stories and whatnot, but I feel like there is something unique about like Massachusetts and their metalcore scene in a way, like or you know, you guys with your sort of hardcore scene, like there's sort of like something, I don't know, there's kind of like an underground charm to it that sort of maintains, whereas, you know, the LA 80s hair thing like was so glamorized that it almost seems like you forgot what the roots of all of that were. It almost seemed like the 80s hair metal had no underground.
Yeah, and I guess to that point too, we didn't have a image in Sacramento. Like, you know, they had the LA scene where everybody had the glam hair and the makeup and stuff. So everybody was more of a scenester than it was about the music. In Sacramento, we had no identity. Like, you know, we were all cut off Dickies and T-shirts, you know, so we didn't have gimmicks, or it was all about the music. You know, that's the only thing that drew people to your show is the music. They didn't care how you looked, you know, because we didn't really have a scene in Sacramento. We're just like skaters, you know, so we didn't have like, you know, the grunge or the hardcore, the hair metal scene. Like we were just all just playing music. So that's when you look at a lot of Sacto bands. There is not one Sacto band you see has like some gimmick or some makeup thing. It's like Deftones and Papa Roach. We're just normal dudes, you know, if they're just playing music. So, you know, that was kind of a blessing too. None of us had to like find an image to break through, you know?
Of course. Going back to like your songwriting process in a way, do you find it easier to come up with ideas with your experimental sound? Is it better to sort of like be in the company of your bandmates when songwriting in a way? Or do you just sort of like prefer to be alone in your own element when there's really nothing in between you and your instrument?
Kind of both. You know, there's times where I'm in my house and I'll just come up with a riff or piece a song together, which I think it may go. And then I'll take it to the band and we'll just run through it as a band. And I'll like, that doesn't sound as good as I thought it would. And we'll move it or replace with something else. So sometimes I like building it home and then take it to the band and we jam on it and piece it. Or there's been times where we'll get together and just make noise at the practice spot and we come up with some really cool stuff at practice. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, that could spark something down the road. So a little bit of both. You know, I like my quiet time where I can have time where I can just hone in and on myself. You know, sometimes at practice we'll goof around, but then, you know, our drummer will go off on his own tangent or people will start playing something else. Like, oh, wait a minute, let's try to get back to what we were doing. So it becomes kind of tedious. So I like a little bit of both.
Yeah. I mean, because like I feel like your music does really capture a moment in a way. So like if you're working on something for a long period of time, like, you know, having a riff like for a decade, as you said before, does it sort of make it does it make it a little bit more difficult to sort of like capture a moment or like maintain that initial spark of the idea?
When I write a riff, it has to hit me right there. And then I'll record it real quick on my phone or my computer. I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep this. And then if it sticks in my head, then I'll just keep working on it. We're working on it. And that was the thing with Seven is like we had a few songs that we had written that I actually completed. And then when I look back, you know, maybe a month later, looking at it, I'm like, this song doesn't hit me anymore. You know, I don't feel it as much as I did when I first wrote it. So we scrapped that whole song or we'll throw it on a B-side or something. So Riff or a song has to stick with me for quite a while. And that's why I think I love 7 so much, is because I'll go back and listen to this record and I still enjoy it. I still I feel like I just wrote it, you know? And that's what I kind of aim for when we're writing songs. Like, it has to stick with me for quite a while, because, you know, you never know when your classic song might be the popular one. Like Carpe Diem has like been our kind of our single, I guess, staple, I guess you could say. And we've had to play that song every show, but when I play it, I still love it. Like I wrote it, you know, a couple days ago. So that's important to me. The song has to stick with me for quite a long time for me to like keep it and like keep playing it and enjoy it. If it doesn't hit me, I gotta get rid of it.
So there's never been a time where you just felt something hit you right away, and it was almost kind of like a love at first sight sort of riff or song idea?
Pretty much. I mean, all our songs are that way. You know, like if I write a riff and I'm like, oh yeah, that's it, I got to keep it. You know, then I have to build off that riff, and then like I said, I'll go to practice and I'll show it to the guys. We'll jam on it. If it doesn't sound good with the band that it did when I wrote it, then I will maybe not keep it. But if I write it and I love it and I take it to band practice and we play it and it's even sounds even just as good as I wrote it, I'm like, hey, this is a keeper, you know, and this isn't going anywhere. So it goes through a couple of tests, you know, because sometimes you write a riff and you think it's awesome at home, and you'll take it to practice and the band jams on it, like, this sounds whack. This doesn't sound anything like I had in my head. So then you're like, maybe it wasn't that good. So it has to go through a series of tests before it becomes like the staple.
This is a silly question I've been liking to ask guitar players, though, because a lot of times, like 9 times out of 10, when I ask like how a song starts off, 9 times out of 10 they'll say that it starts off with a riff. Do you think we'll ever run out of riffs in the world? There's only so many strings, so many chords, so many patterns. Do you think that in the future, maybe a century or so from now, we'll just run out of riffs?
I mean, I thought about that years ago. Like, how is there any riffs left? You know, exactly. Like, well, there's a couple bands that are doing 9 strings now, 8 strings. So, but you would think like Metallica would have written all the riffs already, or Slayer would have written all the riffs, or AC/DC. You know, it's like, I mean, and like I said before, there's times like even some of our stuff on our new record where I wrote it thinking like, oh, this is a badass riff, and then someone will point out and go, hey, that sounds like Sepultura. I'm like, oh shit, that does sound like Sepultura. I didn't think about that until somebody pointed it out. So there's times when you write a riff and you think you wrote something new, and then somebody will like go back in the archive and it's like, oh, it's already kind of been done. So we've kind of hit a mark a little bit where like I mean, you can listen to bands now and you can almost pick out a riff. Oh, sorry. From a song from somebody, like, oh, that sounds like so-and-so, you know? So we're getting to that point where it's getting close, you know, but I don't know. I mean, maybe it's like the lottery. It's like you can play so many numbers and you will never, you know, it's 1 out of 200 million will get hit it, you know? So maybe that's like that in the riff world.
Yeah, you got to be in it to win it. But hey, all the greatest pop hits of the last like 50 or so years have used the same 4 chords. So, you know, I could, right on this keyboard behind me, I could play every pop song that exists. So,
well, that's what's cool about music, though. It's like, even if I write a riff if I take a Sepultura riff, right, and I write it exactly how they wrote it, and then Mitch plays a drum beat that's completely different over that same riff, and the bass line's different, and Grady does what he does, like, it won't sound like Sepultura anymore. Yeah. You know, it's like something else. So that's what's cool about music. There's so many combinations you could throw into a blender and make it your own. Yeah. Which is really cool.
Yeah, like a lot of metal musicians that we listen to, like their influence was like ZZ Top, and they learned how to like play ZZ Top riffs like really, really, really fast, and that's how they sort of came up with that. So,
totally.
Yeah. It all starts with ripping somebody off. You just have to.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, you can't, it's like being a child. Like, you don't learn anything new. Everything you learn has already been taught, you know. You're just kind of adapting to your own world, you know. Yeah. So you have inspirations, and like you have bands you love, you're like, I want to sound like these guys, and then you try not to rip them off, but sometimes you just kind of have to, just to get over that hump, you know, just start writing music, and then you kind of going into your own little world. But but everybody has inspirations and bands they love that they want to sound like. Yeah.
And the final question I wanted to talk is just a little bit of a gear talk in a way. I know you've worked with a variety of different gears. Like, I know that you used Gibson, but you've also used ESP. You've used Marshall amps for a while. Just what's your current rig, and why do you use the gear that you use?
Yeah, you know, I've been scaling down slowly but surely. When I started off on the 7 record, I was playing a Mesa Boogie power amp and an old 88 mini preamp that I had found in my closet. Like, that sounds really good. So I was playing that, and then halfway through, Stefan from Deftones introduced me to the Helix.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and he's like, dude, you should try this because, you know, I can get all my sounds in this thing, you know. And so being a musician that we, you know, we tour, not a lot, but we tour enough to where it sucks bringing equipment everywhere. So the Helix is the amp modulator, but it's also a foot switch. So you can have all your stuff in a foot switch. So I started messing with that halfway through the 7 record, and I was able to put all the stuff in my 88 into the Helix. And then I have like it's a Matrix power amp, but they're the solid state amp, and I guess Metallica uses them too, and they're awesome. And they pump out like 800 watts per side of wattage, so they're loud as hell. So I run my Helix through that to power my speakers, and the thing's awesome.
Yeah, Jeff Loomis Jeff Loomis uses a similar sort of setup with the Helix, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I mean, it's for I say for a musician's like a band our size, where you know you play a lot, but you don't, you know, you have to move your own equipment and, you know, drag shit around. The Helix, you just stick it in a bag, and you can just show up at any show and plug in, and you're good to go. You don't have to move tons of amps and stuff. So as an older band, it's awesome, you know, just to have just everything in a little box, you know. It saves time, it saves hassle, and you don't, you know, when you tour a lot too, like the problem with my 88, my old stuff, like the knobs will get moved or break off, and then I have to adjust my sound every show. Like with the Helix, everything's just set, so you don't have to worry about your sound changing, whatever. It's like once you have your sound, it's good to go forever. So that's a blessing. So I've gone to that in my Matrix, and that's all I use for stage stuff. I still have my Marshall cabs, and then I've been playing my SGs for years now. I think I bought my first SG on El Diablo record, and I played I See My Fate on it. I have that same SG still that I played that record, and I bought like 3 more, and that's all I play. I don't play ESP anymore, mostly because ESPs were just too pretty of a guitar. And as much as we played and played shows and broke shit, like I broke a couple of ESPs, and I just felt so terrible. I'm like, these guitars are too pretty. So with the SGs, I have a couple of SG specials, and I've broken the neck on about 3 or 4 times, and I can be able to like glue them back together, and it doesn't bug me, you know, as much as breaking my ESP. So with these guitars, would be a little harder on them, and they still stay in tune. They still sound great. So those are kind of my workhorses that I've been playing.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show, back on the show, and most of all, thank you for another awesome album. It is awesome to have you here. Everybody,
awesome.
We are here with Jeff of Will Haven 7. It is out now. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heaven, New York, and we will see you next time.